A knight kneels in a candlelit chamber beneath the streets of medieval Paris. His white mantle bears the crimson cross of the temple. But the prayers he whispers aren't from any psalm you'd recognize. The words are older, darker, pulled from texts that bishops would burn on sight. Above him, carved into the ancient stone, symbols writhe like living things. A pentagram, an inverted cross, and at the center of it all, a name that makes the very air grow cold. Lucifer. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar were Christianity's greatest warriors. They fought in the Holy Land, built castles that touched the clouds, and amassed wealth that made kings jealous. But what if their greatest secret wasn't gold or relics? What if it was a knowledge so dangerous that the church itself turned against them, burning them alive rather than let their truth escape? You think you know the story of the Templars, noble knights defending pilgrims, guardians of the faith, tragic victims of royal greed. But that's just the surface, because beneath the official history lies something far more unsettling. A brotherhood that discovered truths in the ruins of Solomon's temple. Truths about the nature of divinity itself. Truths that suggested the morning star, the light bearer, the one cast down from heaven, might not have been the villain after all. Tonight, we're going beneath the sanitized legends. We're walking through archives that smell of sulfur and secrecy. We're going to explore what the Templars really found in Jerusalem, why they were really destroyed, and how their forbidden knowledge survived the flames to influence secret societies that still operate today. This isn't just history. This is revelation wrapped in shadow, and it's been hiding in plain sight for 700 years. But first, let me give you a glimpse of just how deep this goes. In 2001, Vatican archivists discovered a document they'd been sitting on for centuries, the Chinon parchment. It revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy before their executions. Why absolve them and then watch them burn? Because what they knew was too dangerous to live, but too sacred to condemn. They had touched something beyond good and evil, something that would shatter the foundations of organized religion. So, settle in. Turn off the lights. Let your curiosity stretch its wings. Because you're about to discover why the most powerful military order in medieval Europe chose to worship in darkness, and why their prayers were addressed not to Christ, but to the angel of illumination himself. The year is 1119. 9 French knights arrive in Jerusalem with a mission that officially sounds almost comically modest: protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads leading to the holy sites. 9 men, for roads that stretched across hundreds of miles of bandit-infested territory. It was like sending a single candle to light a cathedral. But King Baldwin II of Jerusalem doesn't just welcome them. He gives them something unprecedented. He grants them quarters directly on the Temple Mount in what had once been the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built atop the ruins of Solomon's legendary temple. Here's where the story gets strange. For nearly a decade, these 9 knights don't recruit new members. They don't patrol roads. They don't even seem to leave their headquarters. What they do is dig. Day after day, night after night, they excavate beneath the Temple Mount. Officially, they're renovating their quarters. But renovations don't require teams of workers laboring in shifts around the clock. Renovations don't need the kind of secrecy that surrounded their operations. Local chronicles from the period describe something unsettling. Strange lights emanating from beneath the temple at night. Chanting in languages that weren't Latin, weren't Hebrew, weren't Arabic. And occasionally, screams that would echo across Jerusalem's sleeping streets. The kind of screams that made mothers pull their children closer and priests reach for their crosses. Then suddenly, everything changed. The 9 knights emerged from their decade of digging transformed. They began recruiting with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Within months, they had hundreds of members, Within years, thousands. They established a network that stretched from Portugal to Palestine, from Scotland to Syria. They became bankers, architects, warriors, and diplomats. But more than anything, they became keepers of secrets. What had they found beneath Solomon's temple? The official church position has always been clear. Nothing. The Templars found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Because when the Templars returned to Europe, they brought with them knowledge that would revolutionize architecture, mathematics, and warfare. They built cathedrals using geometric principles that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. They developed banking systems that laid the foundation for modern economics. They created codes and ciphers that intelligence agencies still study today. But perhaps most tellingly, they began to worship differently. Templar chapels weren't built like traditional churches. They were circular, octagonal, following patterns that had nothing to do with Christian tradition and everything to do with older, darker practices. They conducted ceremonies behind closed doors, ceremonies that required initiates to spit on the cross, deny Christ, and kiss the feet, navel, and buttocks of a mysterious idol they called Baphomet. These weren't the actions of Christian knights. These were the rituals of men who had discovered something that shattered their faith in traditional doctrine, something that suggested the true nature of divinity was far more complex than the simple good versus evil narrative preached from every pulpit in Europe. The name Baphomet itself is telling. Scholars have traced its etymology to various sources, but the most compelling links it to the Arabic Abu Fiamat, meaning father of understanding. Not father of evil, not father of destruction, father of understanding. The Templars weren't worshipping a demon. They were venerating knowledge itself, personified in the figure that had first brought light to humanity. Consider the symbolism. Lucifer, whose name literally means light bearer, was cast out of heaven not for being evil, but for challenging divine authority, for suggesting that knowledge shouldn't be hoarded by the celestial hierarchy, for believing that humans deserve to understand their true nature and potential. In the Gnostic traditions that predated Christianity, this figure wasn't a villain. He was a liberator. And if the Templars had discovered texts beneath the Temple Mount, scrolls that preserved these older traditions, then everything about their later behavior begins to make sense. Their rejection of papal authority, their secret rituals, their apparent worship of the light bearer himself. They hadn't been corrupted, they had been illuminated. The question that haunts medieval historians is this: what exactly did those 9 knights find in their decade of digging? Because whatever it was powerful enough to transform a handful of impoverished nobles into the most influential organization in Europe, and dangerous enough that when the church finally moved against them, it did so with a brutality that shocked even hardened medieval observers. The year is 1307, and across France, a carefully orchestrated nightmare unfolds. At dawn on Friday the 13th, soldiers bearing the seal of King Philip the Fair burst through the doors of every Templar commandery, every chapel, every stronghold. The orders are simple: arrest every Templar, seize every document, leave nothing to chance. But here's what's strange about that morning. The Templars don't resist. These are men trained from childhood to fight, warriors who had held the line against Saracen armies for 2 centuries. Yet they surrender without drawing a sword, almost as if they had been expecting this moment, almost as if they had been preparing for it. Within hours, hundreds of knights are chained in dungeons across the kingdom, the charges read like a catalogue of nightmares: heresy, blasphemy, devil worship, sodomy, secret rituals involving the veneration of a severed head. But underneath the sensational accusations lies something more specific, more targeted. The Templars are accused of possessing forbidden knowledge, knowledge that threatens the very foundations of Christian doctrine. The trials that follow are exercises in carefully orchestrated horror. Under torture, knights confess to spitting on crucifixes, to denying Christ, to worshipping idols in the form of bearded heads. They describe initiation ceremonies where new members are forced to kiss their superiors in unspeakable places. They speak of a mysterious figure called Baphomet, sometimes described as a head, sometimes as a goat, sometimes as a being of pure light. But pay attention to what they don't confess to. They never admit to standard devil worship. They never describe black masses or blood sacrifices or any of the typical accusations leveled against heretics. Their confessions are stranger, more specific. They describe rituals designed not to summon demons, but to achieve gnosis, enlightenment, direct knowledge of divine truth. One Templar, under questioning, describes the head they venerate as having the power to make trees flower and the land germinate. Another says it can reveal the secrets of nature itself. These aren't descriptions of an evil entity. These are the words of men describing something they believe to be a source of wisdom, of illumination, of forbidden understanding. The name Baphomet begins to make more sense when you dig deeper into its possible origins. Some scholars link it to the Greek Baphometes, meaning baptism of wisdom. Others suggest it's a corruption of Muhammad, implying the Templars had been influenced by Islamic mystical traditions during their time in the Holy Land. But the most intriguing theory connects it to the Hebrew phrase Baphomet, which can be translated as the opening of understanding. Think about what this suggests. The Templars weren't worshipping Satan in any conventional sense. They were venerating the principle of enlightenment itself, the force that opens human consciousness to truths that organized religion prefers to keep hidden. And if their decade of excavation beneath the Temple Mount had uncovered texts that preserved this older understanding, then their entire transformation becomes explicable. Because here's what mainstream history doesn't want to acknowledge. The Temple Mount wasn't just the site of Solomon's temple. It was one of the most sacred locations in the ancient world, a place where multiple traditions converged. Jewish mysticism, Gnostic Christianity, Hermetic philosophy, Islamic esotericism. If any location on earth would contain hidden manuscripts, secret teachings, forbidden knowledge, it would be there. And what would those manuscripts have revealed? Possibly texts that predated the canonical Gospels. Possibly accounts of Jesus' teachings that emphasized direct spiritual experience over institutional authority. Possibly Gnostic works that portrayed Lucifer not as humanity's enemy, but as humanity's first teacher, the one who brought the gift of consciousness, the ability to distinguish between good and evil, the spark of divinity that organized religion claims belongs only to God. This is why the Church moved against the Templars with such unprecedented ferocity. This wasn't about money or politics, though those factors certainly played a role. This was about protecting the fundamental narrative that kept Christianity in power. The idea that humans are fallen beings who need institutional mediation to approach the divine. The Templars had discovered something that suggested otherwise, something that implied humans could achieve direct communion with cosmic truth. The confessions extracted under torture reveal fascinating details about Templar rituals. New initiates were told that Christ was a false prophet. They were instructed to place their trust in a higher power, one that had been slandered and misrepresented by those who feared its influence. They were taught that salvation came not through faith in Christ's sacrifice, but through knowledge, through gnosis, through direct experience of the light that Lucifer had first brought to humanity. But here's where the story takes a darker turn, because not all of the Templars submitted to torture and execution. On the night before the mass arrests, something extraordinary happened. 18 Templar ships vanished from the port of La Rochelle. These weren't small vessels. They were massive galleys capable of carrying hundreds of men and tons of cargo. Where did they go? What did they carry? And who was aboard them when they sailed into the darkness? Some say they headed north to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce, himself excommunicated by the Pope, offered sanctuary to any enemy of the Church. Others believe they sailed west, following routes that had been secretly mapped during their years of power. Still others whisper that they went underground, literally and figuratively, establishing hidden sanctuaries where their forbidden knowledge could be preserved until the world was ready to receive it again. What we know for certain is this: the official destruction of the Knights Templar was remarkably incomplete. Too many of them escaped. Too many of their treasures vanished without a trace. Too many of their secrets survived to influence the underground currents of European thought for centuries to come. The Rosicrucians claimed descent from Templar wisdom. The Freemasons adopted Templar symbols and rituals. Even the Bavarian Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt in 1776, explicitly referenced the Lightbearer as their patron and guide. The thread of forbidden knowledge that the Templars had uncovered beneath Jerusalem continued to weave itself through the hidden history of Western civilization. And perhaps most unnervingly, it continues to this day. So here we stand, 7 centuries later, staring into the same abyss that swallowed the Knights Templar. We've traced their journey from 9 mysterious diggers beneath Solomon's Temple to the most powerful organization in medieval Europe. We've seen how their discovery of forbidden knowledge transformed them from Christian warriors into something far more dangerous. Keepers of truths that challenged the very foundations of organized religion. The evidence is scattered but persistent. Strange rituals, architectural anomalies, confessions that speak of enlightenment rather than evil, ships that vanished into history carrying secrets we can only imagine. And always, always, the name that echoes through their story like a whispered prayer: Lucifer. Not the devil of Christian propaganda, but the light-bearer of ancient wisdom. The one who first showed humanity that knowledge, not faith, is the path to understanding. Did the Templars really discover manuscripts that preserved this older truth? Did they really worship the angel of illumination in chambers carved with forbidden symbols? The church burned the evidence along with the men who carried it. But the questions remain, glowing like embers in the darkness of official history. Because maybe the real secret isn't what the Templars found beneath the Temple Mount. Maybe it's what that discovery revealed about the nature of truth itself. That it cannot be destroyed, only hidden. That it surfaces again and again through the cracks in every orthodoxy. That somewhere in the shadows, it waits patiently for those brave enough to seek the light. The flames of 1314 silenced the Templars, but they never silenced their secret. And perhaps that's exactly as the light-bearer intended.